Support for TRILLOQUY comes from Boulanger Initiative. Boulanger Initiative exists to advocate for women, non-binary, and trans composers of all genders. Women and gender marginalized music creators are vital to the survival of orchestral, chamber, solo, and choral music and are the future of the music industry. Executive orders banning DEI initiatives and attempts to erase LGBTQ plus voices threaten the work behind their mission. Boulanger Initiative refuses to back down and invites us to stand by them. Visit boulangerinitiative.org. That's BOULANGER to show your support during Women's History Month. Every voice deserves to be heard, celebrated, and empowered, now and always. Silence is no longer an option. I'm Loki Karuna, and this is TRILLOQUY. Thanks so much for tuning in once again, and shout out to Boulanger Initiative for all of their support of the TRILLOQUY podcast over the years and for the incredible work that they do for gender marginalized composers. You can check out more of their work by visiting their website, which you can find in the description of this opus. I also want to send out immeasurable, profound gratitude to everyone for wishing me a happy 38th birthday and for everyone who's cheering me on as I begin my transition into my new role as executive director of the American Composers Forum. That was this was said in the announcement, but I'll say it here again. I'm staying in New York. I'm not going anywhere. As a part of my effort to expand ACF's national platform, I'll be on the ground here in the Big Apple, keeping an ear to the ground and supporting artists here, back in Minnesota, and around the world. It takes all types to maintain a just and equitable society, and music creators are a vital part of that. I'll drop a link in the description if you'd like to read the official announcement and to learn a little more about the work of the American Composers Forum. And of course, shout out to everyone at the American Composers Orchestra. I'm glad to be advancing my efforts toward decolonizing classical music in my new role, but also grateful for the relationships that I've been able to foster in my work with ACO. I won't officially be gone from ACO until the beginning of June, so there is a little bit more time. So to all of the Earshot composers and everyone else involved with ACO's composer advancement programs that I manage, there's still plenty of time, and I'll also be around and available even in my new role. So really exciting stuff for me all around. Unfortunately, not everyone has been exactly celebratory. It's interesting how being named an executive director can pull out the jealousy and straight up hate in some people. But at the end of the day, we are all here to do what we're all here to do, and I'll speak more on that in today's TRILLOQUY. But for now, I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Matthew Aubin. Matt is the music director of the Jackson Symphony Orchestra in Michigan. He's the music director of the Southwest Michigan Symphony Orchestra, and he's also the artistic director of the Chelsea Symphony here in New York. He's done a lot of really incredible work in the field of supporting composers and new music orchestrally, but he's here today to talk about his work promoting the music of the late composer Fernande Decruck. She was born in 1896 and has a catalog of music that all but fell into obscurity, as has much of the work of women composers over the years. But Matt has not only done research to raise awareness about Fernande Decruck among the academics, he's also learned French so that he can dialogue with her living relatives over in France. And he's the conductor behind the world premiere recording of a bit of her music that came out earlier this month. Matt and I talk about his personal trajectory, what put Fernande Decruck's music on his radar, and how he contextualizes the importance of highlighting this woman who many of us wouldn't know about otherwise, certainly not myself. So to get us into our chat, I'm going to share an excerpt from the album Fernande Decruck's Sonata for Saxophone and Orchestra, performed here by violist Mitsuru Kubo with the Jackson Symphony Orchestra. It's perfectly performed and beautifully performed on the saxophone, but the viola brings a really nice flavor and nice spin to it. So hope you enjoyed this performance, led, of course, by Maestro Matt Aubin. Again, thanks again for tuning in, and more from me on the other side. Here's a little music of Fernande Decruck in my chat with Matt Aubin.
I had breakfast this morning with the viola soloist who's on the disc that we're putting out, and I said, I want you to check my thinking on some of this. So, but we kind of, as we were talking, agreed that I do think it's just the fact that you, you were a woman, and until not too long ago, there was this pretty pervasive idea that a woman's place was in the home, and if we follow this back to somebody like Fanny Mendelssohn, the idea that studying music and writing music would be maybe an attractive hobby in order to maybe woo a suitor, and then once you had that suitor, you were expected to, essentially be a good wife, and not do those things anymore. Or somebody like Amy Beach. Similarly, I do think, like, when we start to look a little bit historically in France specifically, it's interesting that I think there were more women that were composing in the 20th century than many other countries, and in part of the conservatory system and part of SASM and things like that. But look at the documentary that just won about the bassist in the New York Philharmonic. I mean, that's not that long ago that we were inviting the first woman into the New York Philharmonic. I mean, that's nuts, because now I think we're pretty integrated, at least from a gender standpoint.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I think for me that's how I'd answer that question.
One of the challenges that I face in a lot of my day-to-day work when it comes to general composer advancement for living composers, that I'll see anywhere between 18 to maybe 21% of applicants for opportunities that I put out are women. Now, of course, there's a lot of intentionality that I put behind making sure that the outcomes reflect more than that 18%, initiating equity and equitable practices in that way. So, while much of the status quo on one hand has been maintained through intentionality, we are able to shift, that narrative, that whole perspective. All of that to ask you, is it a lack of intentionality that we should also be thinking about from the historical perspective? You brought up Fanny Mendelssohn. We can talk about Amy Beach. Of course, everyone
Right.
these days talks about Florence Price. Was there just a level of intentionality that's also been missing beyond the fact that there is a societal norm that was set in place for women?
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, some of what's shaped my thinking on all of this is, what do they say now? Being a girl dad. I've
Mhm.
got a 7-year-old daughter, and it is really important for me to have her go to concerts and know that this piece could easily have just been written by a woman, as it could by a man, and to show her that on our programs she has just as much likelihood hearing a female composer as she does a male composer. Same thing with our soloists. Same thing. Even, this is trickier for me because I deal in small orchestras, but even having, when I have a guest conductor, there is intentionality behind maybe what haven't we seen here in this community? Like, have we ever had a woman be a guest conductor? No. Okay, let's change that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, and I really think about that with my daughter. I want her to have role models.
And I'm glad that you mentioned an orchestral setting, because we often talk about balanced programming when we're in that orchestral context. But as we see through a number of different studies, works by Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, and Mahler, and as late as 2024, are still outnumbering all performances of works by women. It also outnumbers works by composers of color, just for the record.
Right.
But I
Right.
wonder, as a conductor, what would you say should be done with works that are well known and regularly performed, considering that we have to make space for more women and more historically marginalized composers?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about this because um, with the orchestra that put out the Decruck disc, the Jackson Symphony, uh, the annual budget is around 1.5 million, and we're about what we would call a Group 5 regional professional orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition to being the conductor, the music director, I'm also the executive director. And with that comes the burden of raising that $1.5 million
Right.
every year. And so I'm always like trying to both bring more audiences in, especially post pandemic. We lost subscribers, so we're trying to rebuild audiences for classical music, and I'm trying to sell tickets and make sure that our earned revenue is up, and so that's all to say that we've experimented with a lot of different things in a 5 concert season, and essentially a 5 week classical season. We do a lot of other stuff. Uh, so some of my most successful concerts have been, there was a program where we did as our season finale. This was, I think, the season out of COVID, the 2021-22 season. As our season finale, we did a commission by Marcus Norris, who you've had on your show. Marcus is actually from Jackson, Michigan, and that's been a fantastic, friendship relationship. And so here's this local boy done good
Yeah.
type thing, story. So started with his commission, had a young artist doing the Chopin piano concerto, and then on the second half we had Florence Price's first symphony. So more than half the music on the program was by people of color and composers of color. And also, one of the things that was really interesting is that the music complemented itself really well. Like I think Florence Price with Frederick Chopin is actually a pretty nice um, pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And so like something like that was pretty successful. On other programs, I've done what I see tons of orchestras doing, which is, okay, here's Jennifer Higdon's Blue Cathedral, and now we're going to play Tchaikovsky violin concerto and, I don't know, Rachmaninoff symphonic dances or
Mm-hmm.
something. And that, I think, kind of relegates the new piece to a little bit of an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, by the way, I'm getting to your question. I know I haven't answered it totally yet about the standards, but a different program. Another example was a program where we did, I think with Jackson, we did a commission in honor of the women's right to vote, called Speakeasy by Audrey Kelly to start. We did a Decruck piece. It was a double concerto for horn and trumpet. And then on the second half, we did Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique, and we kind of had this through line of women, and even with Symphonie Fantastique. And by having half of the program be that music that's unfamiliar, I think that in trying to pair it in a way that speaks to maybe the more well-known work, the canon, whatever you want to say, then I think those have been pretty successful. And so I'm looking to do in my programming more concerts that lean in that way, where the audience is getting um, a real kind of rich experience, and not a quick pass by,
Mm-hmm.
like and 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 then and I'm also, to answer the question about canon, I'm also picking some concerts that are super traditional. I used to kind of feel like maybe I need to pepper every concert with a woman, a person of color, or something like that. And then I don't know, like I don't think you're doing either justice. So now, like I'm actually thinking more along the lines of, okay, this program is really going to have a focus this way, but this program, if somebody isn't so interested in wanting to expand their horizons and wants to just like kind of come and listen to all Beethoven or something like that, we'll give them a couple of that. And again, going back to the fact that I'm executive director, balancing the marketing side and the need to sell some tickets and keep certain constituents happy. So it's a
Yeah, that
balance.
yeah, that's an aspect of the work that a lot of people just don't have perspective on, just having to make the dollars make sense,
Right.
so so to
Right.
speak. Uh,
Yeah.
with with that being said, it has long been my vision for the orchestra industry. When you talk about, peppering in different things, I feel like, in my opinion, that pepper should be the so-called canon. So many of these
Yeah.
orchestras are named after geographies, the cities or the states that they exist. I think what you did with Marcus is exactly what I wish all orchestras could do, to really be the symphony of Jackson, the symphony of
Yeah.
New York, and
Right.
in every
Yeah.
aspect, and then to pepper in the Beethoven or to pepper in the
Yeah.
Shostakovich. I think we have a long way to go, but that's my vision anyway.
Yeah. And it's also like in cases like that, it feels very organic. And I
Mhm.
think that those are the, I didn't just like say, oh, we need a composer of color, and so we'll do Jesse Montgomery's Starburst or something. Having Marcus come in, Marcus came in, and my principal bass player taught him in school, and it's just there's such a good, I don't know, there's synergy throughout that whole experience, and it really felt authentic. It didn't feel yeah. Do you know Thomas Wilkins?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Okay. So I mean, I feel uncomfortable saying this as a white man, but like I went to a conducting workshop with him, and one of the things that always stuck in the back of my head was he was talking about guest conducting, and he was talking about February and Black History Month, and he used the word Negro Night at the Symphony,
Yeah.
and he's like, and that has been something that like I think with all of my orchestras, we really think about is like how do we do this in an authentic and ongoing way where it's not just February that you hear music by a person of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too many institutions are still kind of falling into that trap.
Yep. I mean, I will say that personally, I will always come to Negro Night if that's the case.
Yeah, yeah,
But it is important to go beyond February for Black music, and certainly go beyond March for
right,
women composers. I do
right.
want to talk a little bit about Decruck, but before we get there, I wonder if you could give folks a little bit of perspective on you. I wonder what your introductions to
Yeah,
music were, and how did conducting end up being the thing for you?
yeah. So I was a pretty shy kid growing up in Connecticut, and had started the French horn back in fourth grade, but really was treading water for a long time, not interested in it, not doing well. I in 10th grade joined the marching band, and like the kids in the marching band like kind of made me part of their team and helped me along. I started getting private lessons, and that morphed into me becoming just more interested in classical music overall. I started doing the youth orchestra, buying
And what was
tapes,
your instrument, by the way?
French horn.
Oh, nice, nice.
Yeah, yeah. And mellophone and marching band, of
Of
course.
course.
So and, but like I remember driving to Youth Symphony and my dad having Boston Pops recordings on with John Williams scores and things like that, and just trying to conduct along to Superman or Indiana Jones or whatever, and then getting trying out and getting the drum major position in high school. That was really the first conducting, and it was like I got bit by the bug. It's just such a it's like the ability to like be with any musician at any time is what I love about conducting. I love that I can play that cello solo with you. I can, you know, I can just move around. I can feel like I could actually play the snare drum, which I can't. But like so I did that, went to college at the University of Connecticut, also was drum major there, big college marching band. And then I went and taught high school band and orchestra for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
While I was there, I met Glenn Adsit, who was the wind ensemble conductor at Hart. And I just was super impressed by his teaching style, his conducting. And so I started studying with him. I did my master's during the summers and evening classes with him, and he got me podium time. And then he asked if I wanted to come and do my doctorate with him. And it was interesting because all my degrees are actually in music education with conducting emphasis. So I went to Hart thinking I was going to come out of it with a doctorate in music education with a conducting emphasis and be positioned to basically do a college wind ensemble.
Mm.
And so a lot of my love of new music and appreciation and advocacy for composers has been baked in through having most of my training be actually in wind ensemble conducting.
Mm-hmm.
Because with the wind ensemble, until Frederick Fennell came along, there really wasn't much repertoire. So all the repertoire is being built. And Glenn and I would talk about, okay, we've got this consortium together we have $50,000. Can we get John Adams? Can we get Susan Bhatti? Can we get Jennifer Higdon? Like who can we get to write for the wind ensemble that's never written for the wind ensemble? And you know, all of that was what I thought I was in school to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just, having had taught for 7 years and having had like no time because a high school teacher goes crazy, I I decided, I'm going to play my French horn again. I'm going to like sit in on the orchestra conductors seminars and stuff. Well, just playing that music, I mean, you know, I know I know what you're talking about with redefining the canon,
Mm-hmm.
but also I love my Mahler, you know what I mean? Like as a horn player. And so like I just that was the thing for me that ultimately shifted things. I started getting some opportunities, conducting the Hartford Symphony, and then the Chelsea Symphony in New York City, had a college teaching job. And now I've got two professional orchestras, the Southwest Michigan Symphony, Jackson Symphony, and then I continue to be an artistic director with the Chelsea Symphony in New York City. But yeah, that's my background, but really rooted in band.
Yeah, I really want to underscore that because you made a point that I've made for years. As a band kid, even though I'm a bassoonist, as a
Yeah,
band kid, from the very beginning, we were playing. I'm trying to think, maybe Holst would have been an
yeah.
advanced, a Holst suite would have been an advanced piece for a middle school band. But that's where we're starting. Those are our initial aspirations. So, what is classic, quote unquote, to us is at most 100 years, not
Right.
even 100 years
Yeah,
old. I think about some of these amazing composers like James Barnes, Philip
yeah,
Spark, of course,
yeah,
David Maslanka. We even, can throw folks like Kerno and Holsinger
yeah,
into
yeah.
the pot. There's an entire genre out there that really breeds and develops the ear of band kids in a completely different way than the Suzuki book does,
Well,
or
and then there's this whole like school of mid 20th century composers, David Diamond, Peter Menon, Vincent Persichetti, William Schumann, who Lucas Foss,
Mhm.
who were kind of in Bernstein and Copland's aura and Barber's, but but maybe don't get the same attention. Like I'm for me, like I don't know. I think sometimes like I'm a little bit of a musical archaeologist. Like I I, I want to. Why aren't we coming back to some of those works as well? You
Right.
know?
Ingolf Dahl. I mean, I could
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
and
What a great saxophone concerto.
and I think it's also important to mention, while we've chased the rabbit off the chip trail here with band,
Yeah.
there is a concerto for wind ensemble and piano by Shostakovich.
Yeah.
Mozart wrote wind music. The
Right.
wind repertoire even exists in that so-called European canon as well.
Right.
And it's important to, I think, name it in an ecosystem where orchestra really does reign supreme when it comes to performing on professional performing ensembles.
Mhm. For sure.
Um, so you mentioned earlier that you're not only a conductor but an executive director. I think it's really important to highlight this as well because an appreciation for different aspects of our industry often comes with experience. A lot of people don't know it. I do have a background conducting choirs, but in 2021 I conducted the premiere of an opera. I had never sweat so much in my life. I will never again make fun of a conductor who's got a sweat rag at the
Yeah.
podium. So I wonder, I wonder in a similar way, are there aspects of the arts admin side of things that inspired the emphasis that you put on community? That isn't something that I often see coming from conductors, making sure that community efforts aren't just passed off to the community engagement person on staff, but by the conductor really taking the lead.
I mean, a lot of it is motivated by wanting more people in the audience.
Hmm.
I think what we do is great, and I think more people need to see it. And so I find that when we partner, whether it's with a chorale or a ballet group or a local composer, however, it brings more people in, um, more people know about us. Uh, I think, like my viewpoint on the Jackson Symphony is that it should function in a similar way to the Detroit Symphony, except we're just not going to do as many of the things that Detroit
Right.
does. So maybe we do a concert with I don't know, like maybe we do one education concert that's free for our community for third and fourth graders once a year, and Detroit does 15 of those.
Hmm.
We do 5 classical weeks, maybe they do 30 classical weeks. My thought is, how can we reach our community in as many ways? And then the other part of this is, I think that sometimes like we as conductors, like maybe like ego gets in the way a little bit. So like so we've we'd started the Nutcracker when I got here, and we started it with a local ballet group, and we split the production totally down the line. And the ballet group's very good, and they have like professional level dancers at the top. But they're from Chelsea, Michigan. They're from 20 minutes from Jackson. And that has been so much more rewarding than I think it would be if we were to hire ex ballet professional group from out of town, have them come in. I don't think they'd bring people in as much. I don't think we'd be able to do the run for 4 performances. I don't think we'd be building our brand, so to speak. Like I, I think a lot of people now in Chelsea, Michigan know who the Jackson Symphony is just from this collaboration that's lasted the last 7 or 8 years. So I think there's just, that's how I view it, is meeting the community where they're at and trying to serve them in different ways.
So I think the question there is, in serving different community members in different ways, what is the through line? Is that orchestral experience actually universal, or does programming, play
Well, I
a
mean,
role?
for us, I don't think I will tell you, it's not purely uh, orchestral. So,
Mm,
like, we have this whole series called Music on Tap, and that's the only parameter around Music on Tap is that it's national touring acts or international, it's original music, and it's not orchestral. So that could be jazz, it could be singer-songwriter, it could be bluegrass, it could
Hmm.
be kind of ambient electronica. I mean, we've had it all. I mean, we have Irish and Scottish groups come in around this time of year, which does really well. But that's all to say that we recognize that there's a part of our community that wants live music, but they don't want orchestral music.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's also like a part of our community that really likes concerts in candlelight with a string quartet playing Beatles covers,
Sure.
and that's okay too. I don't want to be snobby about it. Like I want to bring them into our ecosystem because and by the way, not with the idea that all of a sudden everybody that comes to hear Beatles covers is all of a sudden going to be a subscriber of the symphony.
Hmm.
I don't think it works. But I do think what happens is you get a few of those people, and I think you get a lot of people that have a real appreciation and love of the symphony, and that allows you to maybe support other ventures that are more that don't have the same audience or that take more money, things like that. So I think that the more people we serve, like was it the rising tide lifts all ships type thing, and I think we if we do that with our programming, um, I think the revenue that we create allows us to do things because this equal billing project that we've done does not make money. It costs a lot of money,
I hear you.
but we believe in it as an organization. I
Yep.
believe in it.
Well, thank you for that work. I suppose at some point, as an industry, we have to talk about not limiting Irish and Scottish and Gaelic music to March, but maybe we aren't there yet.
There we go. There we go. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
well, moving on to Fernande Decruck. Again, thank you so much for the work that you've done in bringing her legacy and her music to the front. How did she make it onto your radar in the first place?
Yeah. So when I was at Hart doing the doctorate, they asked me to serve as a judge for the Woodwind Division Concerto competition. And as I was hearing things like the Mozart Bassoon Concerto and things like that, a saxophonist played the Fernande Decruck Sonata, which is labeled a sonata, but it's actually a concerto. Like it's for solo instrument and orchestra. There's four movements to it. And I just kind of turned to the saxophone professor who was also on the jury, and I said, "What is this? This is beautiful. This is just beautiful music. Who's this composer?" And she said, "Well, this is just kind of one of the pieces that we teach. It's a
Hmm.
standard repertoire for classical saxophone, but I don't really know anything else about the composer or anything." So kind of left it for a few years, and then I won a tenure track teaching position at Washington State University in Pullman, and needed to have a research interest. And this was the type of project that really just interested me. And so when I started to do some digging on her, I found some more permanently out of print works, but I found that a little article by a French saxophonist, and in the end of the article, he mentioned that in addition to all these works for saxophone, she wrote XYZ pieces for orchestra, chamber music, chorus, solo organ, um, and he listed some of the performers and conductors and orchestras in both Paris and the United States. Musicians like E. Power Biggs, the organist, or
Mm.
Roger Voisin, principal trumpet of the Boston Symphony, or uh, Marcel Mule, the great saxophonist in France. And so I basically connected with a conductor friend of mine who's French, and she made we tracked down contact information. She made a phone call to the family. I wrote a grant I went there. My French friend met me. Like we organized it so that she could be there too, because I didn't know any French at that point, and I was really terrified that I was going to have all these questions I wanted to ask and not be able to communicate. Well, it turns out the son of the composer, his name's Alan, and he welcomed us in for dinner. It turns out that he spent his third grade year in Marblehead, Massachusetts, with his mom. So and also during, I think, the late 50s or the 50s after World War II, he there were a lot of U.S. troops still in France, and he would kind of hang around the barracks and run errands because he knew a little bit of English. And so he improved his English and kind of made money doing little errands for them, and became a businessman. And so, moral of the story is his English is pretty good. So I was able to communicate right away. But that first dinner, it was one of my first tastes of French formality, French rules. Like, there's a way you do things in France, and one of the ways, like, as an American, I wanted to start in and talk about his mom and where's the music and let's go. And this was all about just getting to know each other, having a talk about current events and the weather and family, and having a long leisurely dinner. And then the next day I came around and I started to get to work. And what I discovered is that he had 8 cardboard boxes, like 11 by 17, maybe 5 or 6 inches deep, about 8 of those boxes full of manuscripts, some of which had been published, some of which were full scores with complete sets of parts, some of which were just the score, some of them were fragments, but it was a treasure trove of music.
Wow.
And so I started just scanning, and yeah, I'll stop there because and you can ask me.
No, that's brilliant. One thing that you've brought to mind. So, I'm between my career as a bassoonist and working in radio, I'm very confident in my knowledge of the repertoire. I've been exposed to lots of it. Even with that considered, composers like Messiaen are relatively unfamiliar to me because I didn't really spend my bassoon career playing that genre of
Sure.
classical music. It's not necessarily radio friendly, so there are blind spots based on subgenre, even based on instrumentation. This has come to mind because, as you mentioned, your introduction coming in the form of a saxophone concerto. The sax in our world is very much marginalized. I wonder how much we can blame, as far as Decruck's obscurity is concerned. How much of that can we attribute to instrumentation? Like, I just don't know
Yeah.
the
Oh,
spectrum.
totally. I actually think, like, a lot of it we can attribute to that.
Mhm.
And not only that, but the people that consistently had done any work on maybe finding out about her life, etc., they were saxophonists themselves. And so
Hmm.
she wrote a lot of saxophone pieces. And the reason for that is that she's an organist by trade, but she married a guy named Maurice Decruck. And Maurice Decruck was a bassist in the New York Philharmonic, but he had played clarinet and saxophone in the jazz clubs in Paris in the 20s. And so in the late 20s, when he got hired by the New York Philharmonic, they moved to New York City. They lived in Chelsea neighborhood of New York City. And Maurice played bass in the Phil under Toscanini. And Toscanini, in, like, I think it was 1929, basically said to the orchestra, "Gentlemen, of course, gentlemen, um, we're going to play a new piece by Ravel called Bolero. Does
Hmm.
anyone know a saxophonist?" And Maurice raised his hand and said, "Maestro, I played clarinet and saxophone in the jazz clubs of Paris. I can play the saxophone." And so from then on, Maurice became, in addition to a section bass player, became principal saxophonist of the New York Philharmonic. And you can see the programs. You can go on the Phil archives and see his name listed both when they played things like Bolero or Pictures at an Exhibition,
Right.
things things like that. So she, Decrook's composition career really goes from organ, her instrument, to saxophone, her husband's instrument, and then it kind of branches out to bassoon because Fernande Decruck, who was part of the trio Danse de Paris, was a family friend, and so you start to see her writing for bassoon and reed trio, and it was really interesting the way her compositional career blossomed mainly because of relationships. But going back to why we don't know about her, a lot of the saxophone community knows her. The saxophone community is very interested in her saxophone music, but the saxophone community could care less about her cello concerto
Hmm.
that it ever gets played. And so I think I was really the first person to come along that wanted to look at her whole body of work.
Hmm. Wow. When I think about historical composers, I end up thinking about some of those quick facts or accomplishments that we think about. Amy Beach being the first, in many
Yep.
ways, Florence Price being the first among many ways. What would you say are some of the beginner facts or beginner things we should know about Decrook and the legacy that she's left behind?
Yeah, I think that it's hard to pin her down on one style, one voice. That if you listen to the sonata, which she did for both saxophone and viola, she said it for both ways. That is what I would call her very distinctly French style. It's the natural evolution of somebody that grew up having heard Fauré and Ravel and Debussy. Like it's got those French colors that maybe Bozza and Mio and like folks like that had. So and it's very interesting. I think a lot of her music has a melancholy feel. And this is just my suspicion, but her husband was kind of a philanderer. And I think I just wonder how lonely she was.
Mm,
Like her music sometimes has this very like lonely feeling, but it also has like almost a maternal quality at times. Like there's almost like times where the music rocks as though you're rocking a baby. I don't know. But then okay, so there's all of that. Then there's this other box which is very neoclassical or neo-baroque and wanting to experiment in the same way that composers like Stravinsky were, uh, or doing things that are like bitonal, like she has bitonal etudes, or she has a piano etude that's in 15 too. So like there's a real experimental quality. And then lastly, I would say there's a real love of antiquity, Greece, and so sometimes in the gods, the mythology. So sometimes you'll hear it in the titles like hymn Apollon, hymn to Apollo.
mm,
You'll actually almost detect that the music has like static qualities, like architecture, like big columns coming down in a way. Um, I think another fun fact that like you said give a few fun facts. So here's one. People She used to do organ recitals where the first half of the recital was regular rep, and then the second half of the recital she would improvise a symphony on themes given by members of the audience. So
wow.
they'd write down little melodies or like here's the introduction to the first theme of Mozart Symphony 40, and she would go and just improvise a symphony on her organ recital. So she was a TA essentially for Messiaen.
Hmm.
Several of her composition students that she worked with at the Paris Conservatory in the 20s went on to win the Prix de Rome, but she was never eligible because she was married, not because she was a woman, but because she was
Interesting.
married. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. You know,
You
you talk
know,
about that improvisation. You know, get today's classically trained musicians to sit on stage and improvise on a theme that someone just throws at them.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
we take for granted the level of musicianship that
yes.
some of these folks had.
Well, and I recently had a French saxophone quartet uh, visit, and as part of their visit here, they did a recital with the French organist Terry Esqueche, who's also a composer, and he's one of the three organists at Notre Dame, and he improvises in the same school that Decruck did, and so he actually did that. And to watch him like take, I forget, they did something by Bach, and he basically started with it, but then kind of just went off. And amazing in Rockefeller Chapel or Rockefeller Cathedral in Chicago is amazing.
That's
Yeah,
incredible. That's incredible.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't I don't want to marginalize DeCrook's non-orchestral work, especially
yeah,
that which is represented on this new album. Are there
yeah.
unique challenges or maybe even unique benefits to promoting non-orchestral music? We don't really have chamber music institutions in the same way that most cities have an orchestra.
No, but it's interesting because the first project I did with DeCrook was to work with three friends in New York City to bring her reed trios to life. She wrote 7 or 8 reed trios,
Hmm,
which is pretty prolific, and wrote it for um, a couple of different groups, including the trio Danse de Paris. And that disc, I think, came out in 2015. And what's been really interesting is that since then, my friends have performed it in Tokyo at IDRS. We went to Dublin last year and played at Clarinet Fest. And a lot of university students and faculty members have contacted me. One of the clarinetists of the Cleveland Orchestra contacted me for music. So I actually think in a lot of ways the chamber music is is get a really good gateway drug. And a lot of performers are learning about her through that. uh I always tell people I have I have the three orchestras, but then I have this fourth job, which is like managing all the DeCrook questions and requests for music. And because a lot, like some of her music is published, but there's still a lot that's in manuscript form. And the family and I basically have an agreement where if it's not published and it doesn't look like it's going to get published, we just want to see it being performed.
hmm hmm You know, you mentioned gateway drugs. If I'm thinking about a French composer who I would not put in front of an audience for, that isn't, trained or whatever language we want to use, someone like Edgar Varese, for
Yeah,
example,
right.
he's not the gateway drug, at least as far
No,
as I'm concerned.
no, no.
But is DeCrook, would you say that
Yeah, yeah.
album
Well,
typically is that?
okay, and so this brings me to another point about her story, which is her husband. He had an accident, so he played in the Phil for about 6 years, and he hurt his hand somehow, and that basically forced them to leave New York, come back to France, and he opened up a publishing company called Les Éditions de Paris. And so he would publish a lot of her, like, whatever you want to say, classical music, legit music, or whatever, like solo instrument and piano. But he was also really interested in making a dollar. And so uh, I have this book, Songs of Democracy, and I'm pretty sure the title, the composer's name is Faye Burrell. So she had some pseudonyms that she went by. And there's tunes like Yankee Doodle that she basically just arranged that you could play on piano. I mean, think about, this is the 30s. We don't have really that many recordings yet. People are still making music in their house, and so they were like repurposing American music, and she was putting her name on it so that they could make some money off of it and like claim copyright. And then there were other times where I forget what the German word is, but just kind of the people's music, so to speak. But it's one of those terms we learned in music history. Anyway, you'll remember at some point. But she would write things in one of these pieces is on the disc. She wrote Les Clochers de Vienne. It's the bells of Vienna. It's a suite of waltzes, and this is like light kind of popular music. But it's her voice. It's her voice, but it's super easy to listen to. Like
Mhm.
I programmed it on a holiday concert in New York City one time because it just has that Viennese feel.
Mhm.
And even in this piece that is kind of Decruck light or Decruck pop, there's still elements of innovation. Like she used the vibraphone. This is a piece
Oh,
that was
wow.
written in 1933, and there's a vibraphone solo in it. So that's pretty neat. And again, that maybe that points to her relationship with her husband and her husband's friends that were in the jazz community, that she was aware of some of that. She wrote music for silent films. You can find these foxtrots on YouTube that she that the publisher Les Editions de Paris had put together a little orchestra and put out a little demo record. So she like dabbled in it all. She was not a not a snob, so to speak. Like she was doing things to pay the bills and doing things for her friends and doing things for her.
True. Vox music is that what the word
I
we're
think
looking
so. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
for?
Yes.
So beyond just becoming familiar with Decrook, making sure that she gets recorded, making sure that she gets programmed, there has been so much more work that you've put in to make that possible. We may have talked about your learning French along the
Yeah.
way. Obviously there's lots of travel. I wonder what other sort of efforts, maybe even non-musical efforts, you've put into bringing her legacy to the front.
Yeah. I mean, website's a big one. Uh, so I created the website, and I also created it in both French and English because I thought that was pretty important. Uh, I still am going back and scanning and kind of rescanning some things that maybe I I was never trained to be an archivist or
Mhm.
anything like that. So I've gotten better at doing all of this stuff through trial and error, and so now some of my early work actually needs to be repeated in a better way. For this is a good example, like a lot of the first scans I did, and this may be have even been just a limitation of the program I used, was black and white. So now I recognize doing high definition color scans of everything because in a lot of cases the score was actually used and has markings that are in color. It's so much more useful as a document. So there's that. I have uh, I've worked with a friend of mine. I shouldn't say she's a friend of mine because I've actually never met her face to face, but we got kind of hooked up. She lives in Texas. She's a harpist. Her name's Lisa Lamb, and she basically, on an ongoing basis, works to engrave anything that I want and basically gives me a first draft in Sibelius. And then I usually go in and edit it and fix things. And because I was doing a lot of that stuff at the beginning, and then between having a child and having three orchestras, it just got to be too much.
I mean,
So,
that's a resource that many composers which they wish that they had, someone to a
right.
copy to start. Uh,
Well, but like, so you know, yes, I did when I was at Washington State. I got a certain amount of money for travel and everything, but really, like, even not including any of my air travel and hotels, just in the engraving costs and in website upkeep and things like that, it's easily around $25,000
I
that
believe
I've
it.
sunk into it, and then with these larger scale recording projects, my wife and I have made significant donations personally towards the project. But yeah, so but also there's been a lot of people that have helped us out. Like now, whenever I go to France, I stay with the composer son, Alain Decruck. He, we are close. He's French grandpa in my house. So
Wow.
it's this really beautiful thing that's happened to my life. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's very beautiful. Très beau, if I have that correct.
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
I'm gonna have the a link to this new album in the description. But just in case I forget, what's the name of the Decrook website that folks can take a look at?
Easy. It's fernandedecruck.com. And Fernand, just like a little lesson on French names, has an E at the end of it. Fernande, because she's a woman. Decruck. So it's been a long day. .com. If you're in France, it's .fr. So at the end. But yeah.
Excellent. And then for folks who want to engage this music beyond just listening, let's say there's a an artistic director who wants to program it, or a chamber music ensemble. What's their pathway to getting these scores and these parts?
Right. So anything, almost anything that is published and available for sale, I have a list of US vendors that they can just send me an email. Like, so organizations you probably know in the bassoon community, Hickey's,
Oh yeah,
Growth.
of course, yeah.
uh, they carry a lot of it, but the publisher is actually Edition Billaudot in France. It was Gerard, like it kind of looks like Billow Dot, but
Okay,
Billaudot. They've probably published now 30 to 40 of her works, some of which are the reed trios. There's wind quintet and piano. There's orchestral works, some of the solo works with piano. Most of the saxophone music is there. And then anything else, if they just submit the contact form on the Decrook website, they can reach me. And like I said, is as long as I don't have like an immediate plan for publication, it's not about to come out next month, I'm happy to send folks things.
excellent, excellent. Well, again, thank you for all of this work. As
Yeah.
we wrapped up, I want to, sort of take this conversation and your work and put it in our contemporary context. Everything that we've been talking about for the past hour, as far as many people are concerned, falls into this DEI, quote unquote, that a large part of the population is opposed to. Maybe you didn't initially see your studies and your work around DeCrook as activist in nature, but I wonder if you do now, and how this work has informed your broader efforts surrounding marginalized composers, historically marginalized composers.
Yeah, I saw that question, and I I'll just like maybe like tell you some anecdotes around this project, or also like Marcus's visit in his relationship with the orchestra. I feel like in both cases, uh, there was there's something organic about it, and um, I think in both cases there's some really nice storytelling around these things. And I will also tell you that like I knowing a lot of the political beliefs of my different patrons,
Sure,
um,
sure.
well, I would say that in both cases, both Marcus Norris's music and Fernande Decruck's music, we've received financial support from people that are on both sides.
I see.
We don't. Is it maybe subtly activist? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm definitely, it's a driving factor. It's something I want to think about and consider, and uh, something that I think, especially my relationship with the Chelsea Symphony in New York City and some of the work we've done here with socially engaged programming, has really helped refine my thinking on. But I've always really tried to lead more with I don't know, with the art in the project, and then let the I don't know, like I think it's, I don't know how to answer that. Like I guess maybe we are. I will tell you that if, you know, again, as an EAT executive director, there's this list that's going around of all the terms that will be flagged in NEA
Hmm.
applications. I thought it was a joke when I first saw it. I mean, like there's the word equal will be flagged, like,
Right.
uh, and so, will that stop me from applying to funding? No. And will I try to find ways to work within the system to still get an equal billing project 3 out, uh, in another recording? Yes. I from that standpoint, um, I suppose we are resistant, and totally, in terms of like what happened at the Kennedy Center is just an abomination. I mean, it's terrible. Yeah, and I I don't know, like, and then I also, like, kind of, this time that we're living in, it makes me think a little bit actually about Decruck and
Hmm.
how her most fruitful period as a composer and her most successful period was writing for orchestras uh in occupied Paris, where many of the audience members were Nazis. And I I wonder what, like, she thought of that, and I wonder, like, I don't know, like, I just, this time that we live in, it's I've never been super outspoken about my politics, but I think most people know where I lie. um and so I I don't know, I just think I wanna my main mission is to get the music out there, to support the people I believe in, to be an ally, to, yeah. So, if that counts as activism, okay.
A bit of the finale from Fernande Decruck's saxophone sonata, beautifully realized there once again by violist Mitsuru Kubo and the Jackson Symphony Orchestra. A huge shout out to Matt Aubin for his work in reviving and celebrating the legacy of Fernande Decruck. And of course, thanks for joining me here on the Triloquy podcast. An honor to have him as a part of the Triloquy family. I'll have a link to that recording if you're interested in checking it out. Okay, so today's Triloquy is a response to a couple things. So, at the end of my chat with Matt, as you heard, I asked him about the degree to which he considers his work activist in nature. This is important for me to highlight because many activists don't see themselves in that way. And for the record, this is not me applying my definition of activism to Matt or to anyone else. I'm just highlighting the fact that progress in the field of music and really in society overall is often led and initiated by a single person who's driven by curiosity or by mission or whatever it may be. I'm always thinking about the power of the group, but also the power of the individual. And I think that's apparent here when it comes to the legacy of Fernande Decruck and the work that Matt is doing. This curiosity driven activism, comes from many different places and not always from the where or from the how people might think. I can't help but to think about this as it relates to the conversation. There are many, many women who have taken up the task and dedicated their careers to fighting for gender marginalized composers. I would include Laura and the whole team at the Boulanger Initiative in that. But you don't always see men doing the very same thing, right? So if we can step back a little bit, this can be applied to white people like Rachel Barton Pine, who's dedicated her life to promoting music by Black composers, or people like Alpha Dworkin, who's neither Black nor Latina, but focuses all of her work on those communities within the arts. Now, again, this isn't me naming anyone as an activist necessarily, as much as I'm trying to showcase the degree to which people from outside of specific communities can and do play a part in fighting against historic and systemic oppression within the arts and beyond. It's very important work for us to do. And I think an important thing for us to think about. I believe that there are spaces that should center women and should be exclusively for women, the same that there should be spaces that center people of color, especially Black people here in the United States, spaces for, us gays or or whatever the affinity or specific type of group may be. We definitely need those spaces, and I will always highlight and champion the importance of that sort of engagement. We definitely need those affinity spaces because there's a level of safety that isn't always present in more open spaces. I also, though, want to affirm that our field and our society will not be saved in silos. We all have to do the work we need to do amongst our groups so that we can expand our efforts for the sake of others. Matt is a great example of this. His love and admiration for Fernande Decruck is not a virtue signal. This is work he really wants to do, and the outcome is great. The outcome puts more women and more men and more and everyone outside of the binary onto the brilliance and the history of Fernand Decruck. It's the benefits of this work are countless. Whether or not this is a woman, is a conversation that I think is important to have. But I also think it's important to highlight again that people outside of communities that are being focused in this equity work need to be involved as well. And I shout out and champion everyone who takes on that work, whether you're within those communities or outside of it. This is not me giving anyone a gold star. That I'm not doing anything like that. I just want more of us to think in this way. How can we support people and communities outside of what directly impacts us creatively or even professionally? I think about this as it relates to me and composers. I believe that composers really are going to frame the future of this art form and help all of us experience a decolonized ecosystem. So yes, there is something in it for me in that way, but I'm not a composer. This isn't about me trying to get my symphonies on or anything like that. And I'm not going to even, go as far as to say it's selfless work because there is benefit to the work, if nothing but a biweekly paycheck. But I just hope that, you're hearing the point that I'm trying to make here. We all have to reach outside of our spaces, and we also have to accept people from outside of our specific spaces who are interested genuinely so in having positive impact. Yes, there are many, many people who do have some ulterior motives. I'm not saying that those people don't exist. I'm saying that people without ulterior motives exist as well. Dismantling the patriarchy, as I always say, is not women's work. We all play a role in that. Fighting against racism isn't just for racialized people to deal with. Everyone has to play a role. I could go on, but again, I hope my point is being understood. We all need to take a cue from people like Matt when it comes to doing whatever work there is for us to do. And that's how I'm approaching my new executive director role at the American Composers Forum. As soon as the news hit the internet, there were people calling me a sellout or saying that my appointment was whack, quote unquote. And these are Black people who are throwing stones at me. And you know what? I get it. What have these institutions actually done for our communities? What histories are in place that frame people's opinions and lived experiences with organizations like ACO and ACF? As someone who long carried the flag of anti-institution, I get it. And I don't want to invalidate anyone's perspective on the degree to which revolutionaries like myself should be involved in the suit and tie corners of the arts, as I call them. But I'm taking on this role in the same spirit of what I've been talking about here today. It's not just up to the most polished, quote unquote, professional, white, funder attracted business people within the arts to deal with the problems that exist in our field. I've been given an opportunity to push the dialogue and the work forward with an institutional budget, with a board of directors that know and trust me, and ultimately with a community of music creators and composers and music lovers who don't want to sit on the sidelines while fascism slowly takes over the United States. And among those who I consider being on the sidelines are those who are warriors behind their keyboards and cell phones, but maintain military silence with those who are in a position to shift dollars and to shift general discourse. I'm so disappointed in those who have chosen to take this moment to slander my name. But like I said, I get it. I get it because I've been that person. I've been the person who doesn't really trust the principal Black musician in an orchestra that centers Western European music in their programming, much less the conductor. I've been the person fired by a Black CEO who prioritize the company's majority white funders and constituents. I have been that person more than most people have been that person. I'll go as far as to say all of that to say, I hear you and I get you. My becoming a so-called suit is something you don't have to have trust in. But you know what? I have trust in myself. I chant every day to never sacrifice my values and uncompromising opposition to white supremacy culture as I move closer into the belly of the beast that is the nonprofit industrial complex. I'm always arguing with someone behind the scenes in an effort to dismantle even the smallest instances of injustice, even if no one will ever see it or will ever know. But more important than all of that is my having continued faith in creators. You don't have to like me for me to advocate for you. You can say anything you like, but at the end of the day, if your art opposes the status quo, I consider you a part of my work. I find it validating to see a growing group of artists who aren't sure about my motives or abilities, because that shines a light on how deep the problem is. All of the greatest change makers dealt with that and had to get their hands dirty in that way to get something done. And again, to those whose trust and support I do have, thank you. This work is also for you. In the spirit of Bodhisattva, never disparaging, I hope that this message, is being received in the spirit that I intended. This isn't a call out of anyone. I consider this a call up. I see you, I affirm you, I understand you, and I support your efforts as artists, even if you don't support my efforts as a boardroom agitator. But if you do come with critique, have some ideas in your other hand. I've fought too hard and I've tried for too long to be halted by anyone whose goals of dismantling don't come with ideas for rebuilding something for us. Vengeance breeds more vengeance. Trauma unchecked breeds more trauma and even violence. I've personally had to learn how to get rid of my hate for white people and to deal with the traumas that I've experienced at their hands over the course of my life so that we can get something done, so that I can actually have a positive impact on the communities that I care about most and the entire world. That's what I want for people who are upset with me, to set that spirit of vengeance and trauma to the side so that you can grow and so that you can be a part of this growing resistance that I'm trying to lead, at least within the arts. Love, patience, and mission is what I'm interested in. Thanks so much for doing whatever it is you're doing, and thanks so much for supporting what it is that I'm here to do. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Let's never give up. Peace.